This is International Master Eric Kislik, and I will be covering some classic games over the next couple weeks. The game in question here is McDonnell versus Labourdonnais, and it was played in 1834 in London. And the reason why I chose to look it over today is because the final position of the game is actually one of the most famous in the history of chess, illustrating the power of mobile connected pawns. And the reason why I wanted to bring it up is because I wanted to emphasize the importance of being really objective about analyzing classic games and really understanding what mistakes were made and trying to help players appreciate when they have more defensive resources than they really thought that they had. So a lot of players look through this game and they go, well, Labourdonnais just completely crushed him and McDonnell had no chances, but I want to highlight that it wasn't so simple, at least at this stage, because the point here is that if we look at the position, none of White's pieces are really actually badly placed. Yes, Black does have the bishop pair, but if White plays the move knight to d6, which is the move that I propose as best here, what he's doing is he's threatening the rook on e8, and he's threatening to play bishop to a4. So basically, Black has to take on d6, giving up his bishop pair, and White can play bishop a4. And now when Black takes on c5, takes, White wins back the a5 pawn, and the position will actually only be equal here. So interestingly enough, this was how White should have gotten out of his problems. So you'll see in the game, it looked very, very one-sided, mainly because it was. Basically, Black just decided to sacrifice and play for the strength of his pawns, and White was just too materialistic. And you'll see that here. So bishop a4 was played, and then Black went queen h6. And White decided to take the rook with bishop takes e8. Then f takes e4 was played. So Black's pawns look really strong, and the immediate plan is to go e takes f3. So c6 was played, and Black was actually able to just go e takes f3. And the point was, if c takes b7, Black checks, king h1, take, and now the rook comes in, and the king simply gets mated by rook and queen, check, king g1, rook c2 check. If the king goes to h1, then queen f3 check, and queen g2 mate. So that does not offer any chances. Perhaps the best defensive chance was just to go rook f1, but then Black can simply go bishop c8. The bishop on e8 is still attacked by the rook, so if bishop d7, there's queen g5. And if rook f2, here we have a very nice move, the move bishop a6, and the queen is overloaded defending the rook on c1. So after queen takes a6, there's queen takes c1 check, queen f1, queen c5, and in this position, Black is winning. It'll take a little bit of time. For example, I was looking at rook takes f3, check, king h1, takes, and then d2, and here White is helpless to defend. So that's quite convincing. So rook c2 was played in the game, and this is a very interesting moment. I looked over lots of commentary. I must have seen this game in about 15 different books, but I never saw anybody here mention the move bishop to a6, which I think is a really fantastic move. And the idea of this move is that after queen takes a6, we get to go e4. And now, if rook takes d4, there's queen e3 check. So after g takes f3, which looks like basically the only move, we play d3, attacking the rook on c2. After rook g2, we take on f3, continuing to play with tempo. And after rook g3, we can just go bishop to d6. And if he retreats the bishop, we can just take and go queen takes h5. And this position, after check, king h1, queen g5, is going to be helpless for White. So a very interesting combination. If any of these positions are too complicated, I would recommend just pausing the video and looking at the position. But the main idea here was this move bishop a6, which I think is really brilliant and overlooked by all of the commentary that I saw. So the reason one of the main reasons I decided to analyze this game was because this is something new to add to the analysis. So queen e3 check was played, And as was pointed out by Kasparov and my great predecessors, rook f2 would have defended. Here, black can play the nice move bishop a6 again, which is a common theme. Queen takes a6, bishop c5. So now that the queen has been distracted, we can play bishop c5 with the idea of d3. And then if takes, we can go queen g5. Still a very complicated position, but white is objectively able to defend here. So even though we have to give back the rook, white is still able to defend because it gets the queens off here. So rook f2 still would have allowed white to defend here, and this has been pointed out by other commentators. So rook f2 is not a new move, but it is a very important one. So king h1 was played. The problem with king h1 is the king is locked in the corner, and now black just gets to simply prepare to play f2. First he defends his bishop with bishop c8, and then after bishop d7 he simply went f2. And it's important to realize here that black is hardly down material at all. He has the bishop pair and a pawn for the exchange, and those passed pawns are really, really strong. So white went rook f1, and then simply d3, and now you can see the pawns are just rushing forward. Basically black, after rook c3, he went takes, e4, defending the d3 pawn, queen c8, bishop d8. He just blocks. He could have played rook d8, but this is perfectly good. Queen c4, queen e1, and now the pawns speed ahead. The plan is to go d2, e3, e2, and there's not a chance of stopping the pawns here. So queen c5 was played, attacking the rook on f8. Of course, black shouldn't be caught napping here, so he just went rook g8 to defend it. And then rook d1 was played, and then simply e3. Queen to c3 was played, and now queen takes d1, rook takes d1, e2, and the pawns are much too strong to be stopped. So this position here is one of the most famous in the history of chess. Really, really amazing final position. I have had one position which was very similar to this that I had with black, where I had pawns on f2, g2, and h2 as a final position, and I ended up being in a position where I was going to get at least two queens. So definitely a picturesque final position here, but the important thing to realize was that black's play actually required a fair amount of subtlety. There were some lines where bishop a6 needed to be played, and white had some defensive possibilities like knight d6 earlier, and the move rook f2. So the important thing here is that when you're defending, really you have to keep your head up, you have to look out for all your possibilities, and really think about what are the strengths in your position and what are the weaknesses the opponent may have. And if all of your pieces are on relatively good squares, the position may really not be that helpless after all. So, just keep your eyes open when you're defending and try to look out for as many resources as you possibly can.